Hey everybody, this is Andrew and JC, and we're here with an episode of Sasquatchers that you're not going to want to miss. I think we're going to get into some really cool topics with our guest tonight. His name is Mark Fiorentino, and we will talk to him a little more after the intro video.
The truth is out there. Never stop looking. Never be sheep. Always disrupt. We are the ungovernable. We are the truth seekers. We are Sasquatchers.
And we're here with Mark, who is an author and has been obsessed with Einstein's unified field theory ever since hearing about it at the age of 10. He has worked for many years in the high-tech industry, including for IBM. And tonight, he's going to chat with us on Sasquatchers.
Mark, we're going to have no idea what he's talking about.
Oh, you will.
We'll try our best to keep up, but how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks.
Awesome. I have my Google search window ready.
Yeah, that's good. You're not
something that immediately jumped out because Einstein. I have a little bit of a theory that involves time travel. And it has to do with Einstein and my very, very, very basic understanding of relativity. And I guess out of the gate, I'll just throw it out there. Is it possible to travel through time via quantum leap?
I don't know exactly what they mean by a quantum leap, maybe like the TV show or whatever, but time travel is possible. For many years, I didn't want it to be, and I was against it because I think it's unethical, especially going back in time and immoral for that matter. But as I've come to understand it, especially in consideration with the other side, the spiritual realm, which is outside of time, come to learn that time travel is possible because of one very important thing. All of time is happening at the same moment. And if you can get outside of time, then you can jump back and forth between various time dimensions, time locations on this timeline or others. It gets very complicated because we're getting a lot of information about not only different times, future and past, but other timelines. And this is sort of being confirmed from the other side as well in my research there with near-death experiencers and mediums, is that it's not just one timeline. They're running in parallel, and especially the future part. If you want to envision time as like a rope that's going through space, past is a solid rope, but the front part, right before present time, as it's moving along, is frayed. It's got millions of possibilities, and the further you go ahead, the more possibilities and possible timelines open up, only until we get to that current moment in this physical timeline does it collapse and become part of the past. But that's all in the physical realm. In the physical realm, we have time mainly because of one very important thing: space. Without space, there's no time here. It's vitally important to realize that distance equals rate times time. If space were equal to nothing, absolutely nothing, as many scientists will swear it and mathematicians will swear, space is nothing. It's an empty vacuum with nothing in it. but it's not. It's a quasi-elastic solid. We've known this for centuries. It's what they call the ether. Unfortunately, they thought they disproved it back in 1905, but that's not true. And my research clearly indicates there's an ether. So space is a real thing. And because it's a real thing, as Einstein said, according to general relativity theory, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of its existence for standards of space and time. Measuring rods and clocks, it just simply wouldn't work if space wasn't a real thing. And let me give you an example. If it takes light 8.5 minutes to get to Earth from the sun, if there was nothing out there and we used the distance equals rate times time formula, it would take 0 time for light to get to Earth. And that never happens. It's never seen that way. So we know for sure light is traversing through something. So in this realm, time exists primarily because space exists, something that the creator is either made of, it's pure consciousness, and it exists everywhere, and it's always been here, it's eternal. But it gets trickier when you look into the timelines and alternate time dimensions and so forth. So the quantum leap thing, if there's a time machine, I'm not sure how it works. I talk a little bit about it in the book, but you're going to have to modify space in some way to tear it open, pull it apart, probably using high frequencies.
Would it be possible to use frequency to speed up one's biological makeup, the molecules, and then through the vibration of the molecules hop into a different time?
It may work that way, but in order to speed up the subatomic particles is really what you mean, like the quarks that are inside all your neutrons and protons in your body.
Right.
And the electrons going around, they're all operating at just below the speed of light. And if we were to come to absolute zero velocity, reference to the absolute stationary background, our bodies and the speed of light would increase slightly. Well, it would be maximized and time would flow a little bit faster. I mean, a tiny bit. But if you want to make a time machine and go that route, I really believe that our government is using some sort of a fractal lens technology, which is a technology that's based on metamaterials, which adjusts the permittivity and permeability of the material. Why is that important? Permittivity and permeability are properties of space having to do with the electrostatic field and the magnetic field as it propagates through space. If you adjust these properties, you can affect the speed of light, as James Clerk Maxwell discovered in his time with the formula C equals C, the speed of light, equals 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. Now, people in this time, metamaterial people, people who make material scientists, know how to manipulate the molecules in certain materials and drop permittivity and permeability. This gives light the ability to move at fantastic velocities within the material, and they're making claims on the internet, on ResearchGate and such. So we know this for sure. Yeah, do they debate that? The light's going infinitely fast inside of these materials? Yeah, they're arguing about it all the time. Well, it's group velocity versus some part of light is going very fast for some reason, and it matches Maxwell's equation. If you drop those two values to zero, that equation says the speed of light goes to infinity. And that's a key thing to remember, because in my slipwave theory, I talk about how to do that so that you can make your warp drive propel the starship at any desired speed possible, because you have to bias the space, the warp bubble around the spaceship, so that you pull space apart, drop permittivity and permeability by doing so. And you create a situation where you can pick the velocity you want to go. 10 times the speed of light, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000. And so with that technology, you can get to any star as fast as you like. You want to go to Proxima Centauri in 5 minutes? Well, you go 20,000 times the speed of light and you'll be there in no time. And that makes space travel possible. So the whole thing about time is you got to manipulate space. The two are deeply interlinked.
Okay, before we get down too far into any rabbit holes with this, because I feel like I can just throw scenarios at you all night and just listen to your explanations. But first, just for the learning experience, why don't we start at the beginning here? And how did you get into this? You discovered Einstein as a child, and tell us how that occurred for you.
Well, it was quite by accident. I was attending catechism classes. I'm a Roman Catholic, but also a spiritualist as well. And the nuns, I remember asking for all the students to go find some saint born on your birthday. It's 1965. There's no internet. It's not so easy to do that. The best thing you can do is look at the calendar or go to some church documentation or library and hope you find a book with a bunches of saints listed in it and their birth dates. But all I had was the calendar and my parents, and I looked over at the calendar and there was somebody born on my birthday, Albert Einstein. So I said, well, that's going to have to be it. So I went to the Encyclopedia Britannica and started reading about Albert Einstein, and I was fascinated by him. It just resonated with me. And I think that's part of the process, that before life process, that you were trying to remember what you were sent to Earth to do. And so that resonated with me, that moved me. And I had learned about the unified field theory in that same book. And it made so much sense to me. And the idea, the ether, just naturally jumped into my head right away. And I was with that idea from the very beginning. So that's part of my pathway to this research. The other part is a secondary part that comes in with, at the age of 19, encountering a real live medium, psychic medium, who was very good in the town of Casadega, Florida, who predicted this future that I'm in now. Actually got it all right, all of the predictions. It's curious that she was so accurate in everything, whereas there's a lot of struggle with people today to predict things. But at the personal level, they seem to be much more easily be able to predict things. She predicted the proper, my first marriage. I would have 2 children. Would go eventually become involved in electronics, which I wasn't then. And everything was right. And one last thing happened during that. She didn't tell me this one thing. She told my friend who came in after me. And when we were driving to Daytona Beach, first we went to Casadega, and then we were all going to meet at Daytona Beach and party. he was in the car. And he says, "Well, that's something about you, Mark." And I said, "What? What did she say?" I said, "I had a normal reading, the normal stuff, romance and so forth and so on." And she said, "Someday you're going to become famous for some discovery or something." And that stuck with me. That kind of got in my head. And, over the years, I would try to invent things and such. And it was always kind of in the background of my head. And at the same time, I'm reading books about physics, about science, eventually about UFOs. Then I wanted to know how the UFOs work because they weren't using jets or rockets. And I thought this has something to do with the unified field theory because they have anti-gravity. So that needs to be rolled into the unified field theory. So those are the two paths that got me to this direction that I'm finally in 45 some odd years later. That's how I got here.
That's really interesting to me. This was a medium that you just kind of was it like a roadside attraction or
No, this was Casadega in Florida. Most people do not know this. It's the North American capital of psychic mediums and spiritualists. They have a church there. At one
okay.
time, there was many, many, many really well-known psychics that lived there. And we just happened to find one on the day we went there, which was an October day, blustery, gray, overcast kind of day. It's perfect. And we just lucked up. We were just knocking on doors, and some of the houses had little signs saying psychic medium, just knock and we're home, we'll let you in. And this old lady, Martha McKay, amazing, I still remember her name, did let us in and gave us readings. And that's when I learned that I had two spirit guides who were helping me. And I've had encounters with them directly in my later life through the most stressful time of my life. They made themselves known to me in various ways, and even one way saving my life at one point. So that's how I got into the spiritual thing and the spiritual path, and that we're all born with a mission. And
not to interrupt, but how did they come to save your life?
When I was working at IBM, and I just told this to a couple of my buddies at IBM. I never said it while I was there because I didn't want to be laughed at and made fun of. There's this one guy I worked with, my best friend, who used to love to make fun of me. And I never told him, any of those guys. But now what happened was I was driving home from IBM on W.T. Harris Boulevard, which now goes straight through to where I live. But at that time, it dead ended into T intersection. You can go left, the country roads, back roads, very nice, or you go right, shorter, lots of lights, lots of traffic, stressful. And most days, as I'm approaching that intersection, I think to myself, I'm going left. And on that day, I said, I'm going left. And as soon as I thought that, a voice came to my left ear, and I heard it say, don't go that way. Now, this is not like a voice inside of my head, like you would think, like your own voice or whatever. This was an actual sound, a voice, as
Like
if there was somebody
voice.
right next to my ear. And I whipped around in the car to see if there was a guy in the car. And there was nobody there. And I shook it off and I said, that can't be. And then it said it again, don't go that way. And I just stopped there and I thought, like a stupid fool, I went that way because I needed evidence that what just happened was real.
Right.
So I knew something dangerous was coming up. So I'll drive real carefully. I'll be very slow, look ahead, make sure there's no head-on collision coming, make sure I go through any stoplights, check both ways, but make sure nobody's going to run the light or anything. So sure enough, about 3/4 of the way home, I'm on this big, long straightaway. And there's like a golf course on the right. And this truck starts to swerve, a pickup truck, swerving wildly. He's coming in. It's just a 2-lane highway. So he's coming into our lane, and the cars are steering off to avoid hitting him, going all the way across off the road, coming back on the road, going all the way across, swerving like a madman. And then this guy's approaching me, and eventually the guy in front of me bails out, and all of a sudden that guy's heading right at me. I shouldn't have went that way. I should have listened. And I turned the wheel as hard as I could, and I went screaming off into a ditch, and that guy just missed me, and I watched him as he went by in the truck, spun out and stopped in the middle of the road. So my big lesson there was, when somebody tells you don't go that way, don't go that way. And I learned for sure that guardian angels are real from my own personal experience, not just listening to a medium now. This is more real. This is because you're directly interfacing with somebody that normally is not allowed to make themselves known in any way. They broke the rules for some reason, some important reason. I was not to be terminated early. That was an exit point I just missed. Exit points being premature deaths. And so that's how they saved my life.
That's actually really cool. I wish I had an experience like that like when I was hit by a Mack truck about 10 years ago at this point. That would have saved me a lot of pain and suffering over the last decade. So that's excellent that you have guardian angels looking after you.
We
like
all do.
That.
We all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Drews are just blind.
Well,
you have to understand, you have a life path. Odds are that was part of the path.
Yeah.
I
for
know
sure.
a lot of people don't like to hear that. Why would I choose that? Well, on the other side, it's a different story about you. You can't experience certain things. You can't experience suffering unless you suffer. So if that's part of your life experience, to grow from learning, through suffering and all these experiences, you have to have the experience. If you're cheated of the experience, you're not really on your life's path. And I know that bothers atheists. They really can't stand that idea, but when they pass on, atheists become believers in a hurry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't have any redirection, but I also walked away from that. So
You were
definitely
protected. It was experience you had to go through, but you were protected. They knew you would be all right, and it wasn't an exit point. So you lived through that harrowing experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He even survived the melon heads.
That's about the only luck I ever have in life, is not dying. That's a lot of times in cars.
Hey, that's good. That's good luck to have, man.
Whether I'm hit by Mack trucks or they just decide to burst aflame while I'm driving, I have terrible luck with cars, but I always survive it. So that's about the only luck that I have, but it's I guess there's worse luck to have out there. You are you're definitely into mediums and psychics, and I think that's really cool, because I think a lot of science-brained individuals kind of steer away from that. And so I have yet another possible rabbit hole that I'm going to drag you down into. But I'm curious. I see psychics as adjacent to this. Maybe not necessarily like a full-on psychic or a medium, but is it possible to achieve time travel by way of your mind? And what I mean by that is it possible to like remote view or out of body and traverse timelines?
Somewhat like that movie Somewhere in Time. Did you ever see that?
I have.
I have not. I'll have to
It's
check
just
it out.
beautiful movie, beautiful. I think so. I think you can remote view and not only just see other places, but see other times as well. It's tough to get verification because you can't bring anything back with you when you're doing remote view and you're just seeing stuff and so forth. But yeah, that type of ability is there, and I certainly believe that that's possible to do. And there's been some real good remote viewers that's worked for the government, and it's a dangerous thing to work for the government and know too much, as some of the remote viewers have found. I don't do it. I mean, not that I know of. I mean, sometimes I see flashes of things that look so real, but I don't really recognize the place or whatever. But I'm sure there are people that can do that type of work and see things, different places, different times.
Would there be a difference between the experience you had as say, if we were remote viewing and time traveling, would that be a different experience, a different timeline than if we were to achieve physical time travel? I know that you had spoken about how time is like at the beginning a frayed rope, and there's different timelines and such. So I'm curious if the physical time travel would take you off into one of those timelines, but since you're not actually physically moving, if you're remote viewing to achieve it, would you stay on the path that you've been on versus, or is there any difference, do you think?
Well, remote viewing is really works through the power of your own intention. You have to clearly state in your mind what time, where you want to go, so you don't leave it open to some sort of random. You could easily skip into another timeline that looks similar but not be the same one. You want to stay on your timeline. You want to, especially if you're going into the future. But what I'm noticing is that the prediction of future events more than a couple of hours is extremely difficult for even the best psychics to do. Extremely difficult for even the most real experiencers of near-death experiences. It's because they're getting what I believe are just one most likely incident of events at that time and moment of time that they go into the near-death experience, which is constantly changing due to all of our decisions, all of our actions. Time is moving back and forth. The timeline is going like this, swerving wildly. And only can you get general impressions of the future based on, are people doing more good or more evil? You'll be swayed in one direction if people are becoming more and more evil, where there's going to be a calamity, because the system self-corrects. If these groups of people, these governments and companies and so forth and scientists become corrupt to the point where they're doing a lot of harm to the innocent people of this world, this place will be purged. North America, USA, you can be beaten by a power that's greater than any government. And they should be aware of that. So there are people constantly telling us about a calamity is about to happen. I get it almost every day. And it's concerning because I think there is a battle going on between good and evil in the world, and that has a great deal of influence on which path that we're going to get. So as far as people going on this timeline and choosing this, the experience of physically going there, I'm sure, has got to be like Twilight Zone, because if you go in the past, you'll go into the past as your body, with your older body. The body isn't going to go back in time. It's going to go back in time as your current age. So you could see yourself, your kid, your child growing up, whoever you were as a child, and it'll be like reminiscing. Whereas remote viewing might be more like a dream or watching a video, because you'll be purely observer only. You won't be able to interact. That's the big difference between remote viewing and actually going back in time. It would take a very, very powerful remote viewer to interact.
Okay. Yeah. I've always been curious about that ever since I discovered remote viewing. And I can't even remember how many years it's been. And it was on an Art Bell show, probably 20 years ago at this point. And it's kind of, it was always there. That's something that I just had like this deep interest in. And I've always wanted to talk to remote viewers, even to see if they've ever tried it. But you bring up the physical time traveler and how that you're actually physically present and you could witness your younger self. And so I guess now the question that I have would be about the various theories of what would occur if something like that were to happen. Obviously, the simplest one is the butterfly effect, where when you go back, every single decision that you make then affects the future timeline. But I believe there are some theories out there that kind of are opposing that as well. Where do you stand on that particular item?
I'm just against going backward in time. Not a real fan. I haven't really studied the technology or even the idea of how to build it. Usually people like yourself that are really interested in the time travel stuff, you almost always want to go back to save somebody. In the little bits that I've thought about it, to undo my parents' death or whatever, and so that they could still be here. But I realized that whole notion isn't really right, because there's a possibility if you could do that and everybody started doing that, you would pollute this timeline to the point where it gets corrupted. And it's very hard to predict what the results of that would be, whether you could actually cancel the timeline out entirely. I don't know. I honestly do not know. My specialty is in anti-gravity and gravity and the metaphysics of that, and bringing in starship technology into the world. But the time travel stuff is, I'm sure the government is doing it. I don't know how successful they have been at it, because I think there's a high potential for errors.
Yeah, JC and I have talked about this, and we kind of surmised that deja vu could be the result of timeline hiccups being created by
at the very
interference.
That's something I never really thought about, though, like completely canceling a timeline. Like, we're playing with something unknown, something possibly extremely dangerous by changing things in the past. So we don't know what the ramifications could be. And if the timeline was canceled, how would we even know? How do we know we're not, how do we know we're not being in and out of different timelines?
Yeah, because any written stuff, the writing would be changed. You would wake up with different memories in the morning and not even know it. It's frustrating because I've thought about this and I've tried to come up. Is there some sort of test we could do? Is there some sort of instrument that we could set up that would indicate a deviation in the path? And I've drawn a blank in that area. It's a very tricky business. And only if I studied with somebody who actually has constructed a time machine and looked at the math and the physics of it, could I have any hope of coming up with a way to make a detector or something to see if the timeline has been polluted or changed and modified in any way. It's
I
a
wouldn't even
dangerous
know where to
business
begin.
that I don't recommend we get into.
Yeah, it's
Right.
it's like disheartening that somebody as intelligent as yourself almost is like, well, it's complicated. Like we can only theorize. Like that just kind of demonstrates how like incredible it is to even fathom the science that goes in
There
to
are
this.
some claims in the UFO community that some of those UFOs around that are messing around or nuclear weapons site stuff are actually our UFOs that are coming from the future.
Right.
I don't know.
Oh,
So
that's an interesting theory. I've not heard that.
no,
That
the Rendlesham one, somebody out there who was investigating heard them psychically or whatever, and they said to those people, "We are you," implying that we are your future. We are the
Right.
humans. I don't know how many years in advance. So you can imagine if we're doing time travel now, how good we're going to be at it in 1,000,000 years from now, and 10 million years from now. Our bodies won't even look like they do now. In 10 million years, we're probably going to look like the Greys.
Right. That was always an Art Bell thing that he would always kind of bring up that, we don't know. And that as time goes on, the humans could eventually then kind of become the alien life form that we're experiencing during these encounters and abductions and stuff. So that is a concept that I've kind of been introduced to for a really long time. And it was always kind of at least fun to consider.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
If future gray me shows up to tell me something, I'm punching future gray me straight in that soft gray face.
In the face.
I'm not even so you brought up something, and I always like to bring this up because this is like my favorite topic in the world. Have you ever heard of Diglocka?
No, I don't think
the Nazi bell.
Oh, the Nazi bell. Yeah, I've heard of the Nazi.
Yeah, Diglocka, that's just the German for it.
Oh.
So you brought up anti-gravity. And, there are all kinds of theories about what the Nazis were trying to do with this bell, from, free energy to anti-gravity to time travel, all different things. But since we're on the subject of anti-gravity, how do you currently think that we have vehicles that utilize anti-gravity?
Yes, and I know this for sure. For absolute sure.
Okay.
Now, did we develop that technology ourselves, or did it come from somewhere else? The age-old question.
It was reverse engineered, as like Bob Lazar says. I don't know if Bob Lazar is legitimate or not. I go back and forth on that. He's a shady character, but some of his story makes sense. Let's just say that somebody who's seen one of my shows, who works for the government, who wants to remain anonymous, gave me evidence that they're credible people. And this person and another person, while working for the government in the Southwest desert area, saw a UFO. They got close to this UFO within touching distance. That's how close they were. They saw the markings on the UFO. And according to this person, who will remain anonymous probably for the rest of his life because he's afraid he'll lose his job and everything else. That person said that the marking said U.S. Air Force experimental. And just as they were about to touch it and the other man pulled his hand back, this UFO did some sort of, it was about the size of a Volkswagen, did some rolling, vibrating sound, took off and went into the sky, shot into the sky at an incredible rate of speed. It had no jets, had no propellers, it had not a hot air balloon. It was a bona fide vehicle that was running on some sort of anti-gravity technology. So I know for sure we've got it because I trust and believe that person who saw that. So yeah, and there's lots of talking heads out there that'll tell you, yeah, it exists, and no, and they go back and forth. It's all very frustrating, but it makes sense to me that they'd be reverse engineering crashed UFOs wherever they come down, just like in Roswell.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yep.
I mean, Roswell's obviously the most famous, but that's only because somebody witnessed it. How many other
many more than that, and they're
Yeah.
grabbing from all over the world. Other governments are just moving out of the way, and our troops show up there within hours, and they clean up that site and they take everything, including whatever beings are there, and that's the last anybody ever hears of anything.
How does it work? How does one achieve anti-gravity, scientifically speaking? Like, do you kind of have the explanation? Is the unified field theory tied into that?
Oh, very definitely. The original unified field theory only had to do with electromagnetism and gravity. My research indicates that in order to have anti-gravity, there's got to be a second form of linear gravity that exists. It exists within the dipole, the magnetic or the electrostatic field dipole, which is the North Pole and the South Pole, the positive pole, the negative pole. And that's what my experiments and my research have indicated, that that's where anti-gravity comes from. And a note for the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, if you're listening to this and you want me to stop, just come to me. You don't have to, kill me or my family, or I'll be
We don't
happy.
need any wet works.
Yeah, none of that. It's not necessary. But for as long as I'm able to do this, I want to get this word out. I want to help humanity, all of humanity, have this technology. So back to what I'm saying is that I'm about to release a paper that describes the cause of particle motion, something that Einstein was working on in his unified field theory. The cause of particle motion turns out to be this new type of gravity, what I call gravity 2, which exists inside, let's say there's a magnet right here, a magnet. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, the North Pole and the South Pole. There's UFOs that use high magnetic fields. Why? Because you need to amplify the magnetic field to get the anti-gravity and the gravity field. So the North Pole, the positive pole, has the gravity 2, which has the lines of force going in it, going that way. The South Pole, lines of force coming out this way. This is the gravity 2, the attractive force. So it's pulled forward. The lines of force coming out of the back, the space is literally being pushed in that direction, deformed in that direction. It's being pushed, chases the North Pole or the positive pole. That's how particles move. Aliens, I'm sure, have discovered this, are aware of this, and use this type of technology, either magnetic or capacitors like Thomas Townsend Brown used, to create great high voltages that will create the thrust necessary not only to cancel gravity underneath, but thrust it in any direction you want. Using this technology, you also stretch space apart. You drop the permittivity and permeability. You cancel the Lorentz transformations, which amounts to contraction length will not happen. Time dilation will not happen. You're in your own realm when you're in the slip wave. You're protected from all of that so that you can do huge movements ridiculously fast, stop and go, left, right turns without any inertial effect. Because inside of that craft, it feels like you're not moving at all because the space is being deformed and shaped in such a way is that the only gravity you feel is what's on the front or coming up from the bottom of the gravity wave emitters that are there. And so it's a perfectly natural thing. You can zip at 10,000 miles an hour in this thing, the slip wave, which I'm about to announce. And you don't feel any inertia. You're not pulled back in your chair at all. It's a beautiful thing, and it has to work that way. Otherwise, you couldn't go at these great speeds. If you went to near the speed of light with a rocket ship, time would slow down, your ship would compress, the mass would increase, which would make you require more and more energy to get toward the speed of light. Not a workable system. This system allows you to harness your energy in such a way that with a certain amount of energy, you can have incredible velocities and incredible abilities. And this is your entry-level anti-gravity technology.
You know what you described right there? For some reason, this image popped into my head as a way to kind of rationalize what I was hearing. So, is that kind of the same principle of, say, I'm driving in a car, I'm going 65 miles an hour. I look over, I happen to notice that for some reason, somehow there's a fly in my car, and it is unaffected by the fact that we are driving 65 miles an hour, and it's still just kind of casually being a fly, just kind of flying next to me. Uh, is that kind of the same principle of physics? Just kind of dumbed down to me driving with a fly?
In reality, that's a relativity between you and your speed and the speed of the fly. You're both going at the same speed. So, but in reality, the motion relative to the Earth's surface, you are both affected by a certain amount of inertia. It's so small, especially when you're not accelerating. As soon as you stop accelerating, you don't feel that pullback. It's like you're not moving at all.
Right.
So this is different. This is your body reacts to acceleration because all of the particles in your body are making mass, and that mass, it turns out to be the particles are projecting small gravitational fields. And when you move massive objects external with an external force like that, they have inertia. They resist the motion of being pushed by some external force. What happens in an anti-gravity machine or the slip wave is that all of the mass, the ship weighs zero. It's as if the thing has no mass at all because it's disconnected from the attractive force of the Earth's gravitational field. And
Okay, right.
the mass within all of the object is zeroed out essentially because it can't interact with space. And so the acceleration is not feel because the space, the bubble in it has been deformed in such a way that this is hard to explain. There is no inertial drag because you're biasing the space, you're twisting it and pulling it apart in such a way that all the mass, your body, everything in that spaceship is kind of in its own realm. It's disconnected from the environment. And when you move, the environment, the space, snaps into the shape of all the particles and everything in your ship, along with this anti-gravity field that keeps everything massless relative to the Earth, relative to other people who are looking at you that are not in the field. It's like your own realm, and when that realm moves together because of the field, moves all at once and everything in it, your motion is only relative to that field, and you're not moving in that field. You may be moving through space, but within that field, relative to that field, you are not moving. So you feel no inertia. And you don't feel the space around you because it's been contorted by the force field. And that's perfect. That's just the way it has to be in order for UFOs to have the ability to do what they do.
Looks like we lost Drew. I don't know where he went. He must have got timelined out on us.
Stop messing with the timeline.
His timeline was canceled too. You're talking about this project that you're getting ready to announce, and that's what you're talking about right now, correct?
Yeah. Einstein, I got the idea that it was important to find out how particles move, how they did it, how the photon can go across the universe at the speed of light and never slow down, never stop. And and they don't require like a jet engine behind them to push them. They do it on their own by virtue of their own structure. I had to figure that out. And I thought, surely Einstein must have thought of this, because this is a very vital part of the unified field theory. You have to break away from kinematics, kinematics is the dealing with the motion of things without knowing the cause. It's the branch of mechanics concerned with the motion of objects without reference to the forces which cause the motion. That's an incomplete thought. That's an incomplete use of the study of things that are in motion. You have to know their cause. So I went looking through his papers, his research papers for unified field theory, see if he ever thought of the idea of working on the idea of particle motion. And sure enough, in his unified field theory based on Riemann metrics and distance parallelism, year 1930, which is a unified field theory paper, the last two sentences, he says, nevertheless, I'm still far away from claiming the physical validity of the equations I derived. The reason for that is that I did not succeed in deriving equations of motion for particles yet. So I got chills when I read that. That's what I was looking at. I knew it had to be the answer. That's vitally important. It breathes life into the universe. It's like he said, nothing happens unless something moves. And this whole universe is driven by the particle motion theory, which I now have. Notice he said, the reason for that, I did not succeed in deriving equations. Not one. It's not one equation. It's what I found too. It's a set of equations. You have to do a dimensional analysis. You go between force and mass and energy and force and mass to get to the motion. And you have to convert, boom, 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 boom. And that's what I did with the photon. And so I created a set of equations that takes its energy content, converts it into mass, puts that into another equation that turns it into force with a direction, put that into a final equation that gets the velocity. And sure enough, through calculations, I proved how a photon moves by virtue of its own structure. and it works for any value, any wavelength. And why is that important? Because without this one equation that I discovered, it's new math, that's my personal discovery, the constancy of the speed of light would not happen, and then the universe would break. Every wavelength must go at the same speed, because that's what we observe in measurements in reality. We know that for sure. So I had to come up with a constancy equation that, even though I was changing wavelength and getting different energies, that I had a system that would make the speed of light be the same for each and every photon of any length, any short or long photon length. And I've achieved that. I have those sets of equations now, only because I had the right model. Einstein would have never guessed that the cause of particle motion is, in fact, gravity 2 and anti-gravity. And that's the same thing starships use.
So when you're doing this research, I'm sure, I don't know how long it took you to do it, probably a while, but years, yeah. So you just did whip this out in like a couple days, right? Jim, have you received any kind of threats or demands, mysterious messages? You're figuring out a potential, you're kind of opening Pandora's box a little bit with some of this stuff, and the government doesn't seem to really like when people do that.
Yeah, and that's why I make the announcement to the Air Force. If you want me to stop, I'll stop. But so far, I've heard nothing. And either they don't know about me, or,
I'm telling them right now. I'm sending an email to the Air Force. Dear Air Force.
Maybe he's a lot of talk. I have seen evidence that the Air Force has been visiting my LinkedIn account.
Oh, yes.
Told me. And the part of the Air Force that's doing is the one that's in Hawaii. And you know what's in Hawaii, don't you?
Pineapples.
No.
Dog the bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Data collection facility there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they, I'm sure they have. I'm sure they're aware of you. If you have an internet presence, they definitely know.
If they want me to stop, I'll have to stop. If the choice is die or continue, I guess I have to stop. But this is for humanity. This is for the benefit. I'm doing this for the benefit of everyone, including them. They may not know the theory. They may have just reverse engineered this and had some equations that are sort of kind of right. Well, I got the really good equations, and I'm not done yet. There's still work to be done. There's work to be done in the electrogravitic region and the magnetogravitic region. Those are my next papers. So I'm going to go into the details of how to make gravity and anti-gravity using those fields of force. And that's going to be a completion of the unified field theory. So if they want to stop humanity from knowing the unified field theory, then I guess what are we going to do? It's a shame. It's a hell of a shame, but the corruption, I got to tell you, is pretty bad. And I'm aware of it. And for whatever reason, guys, send the guys with those nice uniforms, and everything, and very impressive. And I have to listen to them, but they haven't said anything to me. I haven't been contacted, so I'm going to continue. Maybe there's some sort of bubble of protection around me. I don't know. I can't say. All I know is, so far, and they kind of did this with Thomas Brown as well. They discouraged him, but they didn't stop him. He continued to work studying the Byfield-Brown effect, which is really what I'm talking about. The equations that I have, I came up with on my own. And then I went to look to see, people are sending me stuff all the time. And some of them send me some of the work of Byfield-Brown, some of the patent information. And sure enough, some of my equations are in his equations.
No kidding.
That shook me up. I says, I know why he picked that equation. It makes perfect sense. I must be right about this. I have the exact same equation. So there you have it. That's where we're at. I mean, I don't want to step on any toes, but
right. And they've already, I mean, like
silence progress and human spirit. And
sure,
I don't know. I don't know. I'm aware of it. I make the announcement to them. If you want me to stop, I guess I'll have to stop. If you're going to kill me, that's going to stop me anyway, right? So
right.
Yeah.
we
know
to do this.
We know the government's already covered up, anti-gravity technology and stuff.
I'm
like
hoping
that.
Maybe in this time period they're getting ready to release it, because it's a whole new world once we get anti-gravity. We can have hovercraft that can move across the face of the earth at thousands of miles per hour. Super ambulances, super trucking things that could transport supplies and medicine across the ocean in a matter of seconds, or very few minutes. I could, living in Florida, I could be in Tahiti in under 10 minutes. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a world where you can travel all the way around. You going to the moon, no problem. That's a 10-minute flight. Setting up star bases and stuff like that, without having to build the expensive, dangerous rockets. Do you wonder why NASA doesn't bother building rockets anymore? Odds are, if they want to get up a satellite, they could just take it up in one of our reverse engineered UFOs and just drop it into space at the speed it needs to be at, and it's there. Pennies on the dollar. I'm talking pennies in cost versus 20, 30, 40, 50 million a rocket to get a satellite up.
So now I have a question based on that for you. We were talking about government corruption and all of the things that they do, but if it really is pennies on the dollar and a completely different form of transportation altogether, is there possibly some oil company people out there that have vested interest in stopping this from occurring?
I don't know that the oil company, it seems to be mainly the U.S. military and the companies that hold the patents, and the aeronautical companies are very active in the suppression. That, along with the Air Force, and not just the Air Force, but the Army and the Navy to a certain degree. I think there's battle going on in that inner group. Some maybe want to release this information and not make it secret anymore. Maybe that's why I haven't heard anything. I don't know. Maybe they're just saying, we'll let this guy go, and maybe he will be our avenue of disclosure. Sooner or later, it's going to have to happen. Some event is going to cause us to pull out the stops, and we're going to see a fleet of our ships, either in a battle with some other country, or for some other reason. I can't even imagine what that other reason would be, but at some point we're going to acquire enough evidence, and we're getting closer and closer with the Tic Tac videos and stuff. More and more people saying, hey, UFOs exist. And some of them, at least some of them, are not ours. Some of them have come from other planets. So they have faster than light space travel, they have anti-gravity, and it's sinking into more and more heads, and the U.S. Air Force can't stop that. They'd have to kill everybody. And they got to know that they can't, the general information, all these people talking about UFOs and all these conferences and stuff, a lot of them drawing similar or same conclusions that I have. I mean, you got to realize that a UFO is a spatial bias drive. Nobody thinks they're using rockets. Nobody thinks they're using helium or propellers. They know it's this. They know it's anti-gravity. And despite the best efforts of the United States Air Force and all these other people, it's the infection of the knowledge is spreading anyway.
Right. Well, I'm glad that it is spreading with you, Mark. I've enjoyed this conversation. Unfortunately, we've hit our time. I always give our guests the final few moments so that they can promote everything that they have to promote, all of your links, your book, anything that you might be doing as far as events, conferences. Just the floor is yours now for you to go ahead and advertise and promote.
Well, just go to my website, www.super-relativity.com, super-relativity.com. And I got links there to all my papers, except the last one. That reminds me, I need to put a link up for that one I just put up, which I'm about to announce through a newsletter. So go to my site, join my newsletter group, so I get your email. I can give you the updates as they happen, because I'm not done yet. I have more work to do. That's what I've been told. That's my life mission. And so I will just continue on. That's kind of what makes me happy about what I'm doing. I'm very happy about it, is that this is something I was meant to do. And this is something I intend to do. I don't want to disappoint our Father in heaven. So I will continue on this path. My best advice for the world in general is, there's one commandment that comes from God for man: love one another. If we all do that, then I'll be safe. We'll all be safe from harm. We just got to get back into doing that. But as far as, my book stuff is on the site, links to Amazon, or while the supply lasts, you could get a signed copy of the book from my website.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, everybody, I want you to, check out the links and,
sign up on my YouTube page.
And you know what? Yes. Buy the book and buy it at the speed of light right now.
Yeah. Now. And if the Air Force is listening, come look at my LinkedIn.
You've been put on notice.
Instead of his. Air Force.
We have Mark's back. Thank you, Mark, again. This was a fun chat here with Mark Fiorentino, and I had to say it again just so that I could prove I was saying it correctly. We're going to go ahead and hit our outro video. And, again, thank you for coming on. This was awesome.
You're welcome.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Well.
Okay, take two. Thanks for squatching, everybody. I never had these issues before we called out the Air Force. Have a good night, everybody.
Timelines.